Hello everybody, and welcome to BSI's June Built Environment Sector monthly webinar. We're going to be talking about a new standards development project today that started in January this year on PAS 8700 for offsite construction of residential buildings. I know there's still quite a few people joining us, but I'll move on to the housekeeping and we can get that covered off. Thank you. So it will be a listen-only webinar. It is being recorded. We welcome your questions. Submit them using the Q&A function. There will be a short Q&A session at the end, and you can just post your questions in that Q&A field at the side of your screen. If you've got any technical difficulties, also use the Q&A function to let our guys know about any issues you're having. So we are recording, and we will send a link to the recording of the webinar out in due course. We would ask you to complete a feedback survey, please. Let us know how we've done. It's always really useful to monitor that. It is a CPD recognised webinar, so please do request your certificate via the feedback survey following the webinar as well. Okay. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'm Claire Price. I'm the sector lead in the built environment team here at BSI. I've been thinking about modern methods of construction for quite some time, over a number of years, and so I'm really happy that we're now starting to develop a PAS for off-site construction in this area. So let's look at the agenda. Next slide, thank you. So I will give a little bit of background on what we've been doing for the past few years in this area and how we've been thinking about it and how we got to this point, and looking at some broader aspects of the project as a whole. And then the main part of the session will be an outline, an update on the project so far. Now, unfortunately, Claire Vokes is unable to attend today. She's not very well. So I'm pleased to say that her colleague, Jennifer Brennan, who's also a director at Harlow, will be able to join us and talk through and give you the project update. There will be some questions, and I will also provide information on how you can get involved, information on the next steps of the project, and an outline of where we go from here as well. So next slide, please. So yes, so BSI has been looking at offsite construction for quite some time. We've been engaging widely with industry. We published our white paper. Obviously engaging with DLUC as well. I mean, we had a workshop, a small round table gathering back in 2017, a workshop with industry, really thinking about what BSI should be doing in this area, how we can help the development of the market for offsite construction. And there was a lot of discussion about the unique aspects of this industry, and really a general sense that yes, standards would probably help. I think a lot of that discussion was initially driven through work coming out of ISO. So we had this information that ISO, the International Standards Organization, was thinking about standards in this area, and so obviously that focused the mind of ourselves as the national standards body, and also industry, because as soon as these standards come out, international standards are published, we do need to engage with them, we need to participate in them, we need to decide whether to adopt them. So that was that really drove quite a lot of our response. But obviously there was also this really, you know, clear need to engage with industry in this sort of rapidly developing market, and discuss what we might do to help. So engagement with industry was one of those key elements, and I joined the CLC Innovation Work Stream for a while, and of course that gave rise to the BRE's BPS 7014, which was published in January 2021. On BSI as a member of Build Offsite, we're engaging with the Offsite Alliance, along with the Modular and Portable Building Association. In fact, I'll be presenting at their conference later on this month down in Loughborough, which I'm looking forward to, just talking about the broad things, the range of things that BSI is doing for offsite construction. And of course, a key aspect of our activity is setting up this new BSI Technical Committee, CB 301, for offsite and modern methods of construction. So obviously it's a stakeholder technical committee looking at new standards in this area, but also monitoring and mirroring the work that's going on in ISO. There is now a subcommittee in ISO. There is a work programme developing standards in this area, and that group is responding to that activity. So in 2019, we published an offsite construction white paper, which was one of the recommendations from the workshop. And we commissioned Loughborough University to develop that for us. The role of standards in offsite construction, a review of existing practice and future need. And it had some interesting findings. I mean, I guess the most important one, of course, standards, there aren't any, or there are very few, and they're very, very out of date. I mean, interesting that there's absolutely no product specifications for those most commonly used offsite products, such as modular volumetric panelized systems, pods, and so on, because our standards are dominated so much by traditional build. I mean, we do have hundreds and hundreds of them, the traditional building standards. So on the one hand, it was interesting the view it took of standards and the need for standards in this area, but the other was really acknowledging the unique nature of this subsector, the rise of the manufacturer and the potential impact on the design and contractor activity. These unique aspects such as logistics and transport, the assembly side, asset management, maintenance, retrofit, future retrofit, and end of life for these types of product. So it was quite a wide-ranging report. It is still available on the website there. But clearly the conclusion was standards are needed. There is a need to agree performance requirements, to think about reducing risk in this area, and to help develop the market. So all of that activity really led to us engaging with DLUC, and obviously their interest and focus is very much on the residential side of things, residential market. They're obviously control building regulations, and there's a key issue which they are concerned about, which is the issue around warranties and around risk in this area. And so they brought us in to assist with looking at requirements that can underpin assurance and getting a consensus around that. So that's how the project came about. So next slide, please. So, I mean, I think defining the need is not so difficult. I mean, offsite construction is seen as something that can provide a really positive response to what is really a housing crisis in the UK. You know, it offers speed of delivery. There is guaranteed building performance, but better, usually building performance design as designed, the profitability aspect, net zero too, I think, not just around performance, but certainly things like waste reduction and so on. And clearly there is a need for more offsite construction, and particularly in housing. And really the government is seeking to set performance and quality requirements in this area, to establish a reference of measurable requirements that industry can align to, that we can then raise those qualities of performance, raise those qualities of performance and delivery, and really make the most of this sector. So I think some of the key issues which concern them are really around the multiple manufacturers producing a range of products with their own intellectual property and unique selling points. So there's quite a lot of siloed thinking in the industry, and that's something that came up in our white paper. But also the issue around multiple independent assurance and warranty schemes that don't share common standards. That in itself makes it difficult for manufacturers and developers who need to comply with diverse schemes if they want to maximise their reach and their market share. That can be expensive as well as time consuming, and also for insurance and lending providers who are looking for reliable assurance for the housing sector. I mean, those issues are really important, and they are major concerns. There's a lot of interest. This is not going to be easy, and we might not solve all of it in one go. But we're going to have a go, and we've sort of built into the plan for this project. Hopefully the plan will enable us to succeed. It is going to be a 2-year project, began in January. We're looking at a large document, potentially up to 200 pages as well. That's one of the reasons for it taking longer than usual. But also the whole issue around consensus and the need to get agreement across these different parts of the sector. So we have our technical author team who are from Harlow Consulting, who we'll be hearing from shortly. We will have a steering group, as we always do for all of our standards development, a steering group which presents a balance of stakeholders, so everybody around the table. Usually with pairs it's only 12 to 15. We're actually having a larger steering group for this project, potentially up to 30, I believe, to ensure that we have that full range of interests around the table, that we're represented around the table. And then we're also doing something different with this project, which is bringing in 4 additional advisory groups from the designer, the manufacturer, the installer, and the compliance side of industry. So they're going to be another layer of engagement and agreement in the decision making as we take this project forward. And of course, we'll have a review panel. We always do. So a review panel is anyone who is not participating but very interested in a subject and the development of a standard, who is kept informed at public consultation and at publication, so that they know what's happening and can engage at a slightly more distant level. So we really do want consensus. We are looking at lots of different types of engagement. This is just one. We've had a number of workshops so far. I hope that we'll have more of this kind of engagement as well as the project progresses, perhaps at public consultation, certainly at launch time. So lots of engagement. The plan is to work within the existing standards landscape. There's quite a bit of concern in some of industry that actually we're setting a separate set of requirements for offsite construction. This is really about working within the existing standards landscape. Clearly, offsite solutions need to comply with the performance requirements, with existing regulations, and so on. So the plan is for the document to link out to existing standards where possible, and really where there are gaps because of those unique requirements, where there are gaps to actually have those the requirements within this new standard. And standards are living documents. I mean, that is really to say, we will publish, and I think the plan is to publish in September 2024. All of our PASs have a 2-year review cycle, so it'll be published, it'll roll out, it'll be implemented. Industry will, we hope, take it up, adopt it, use it, and feed back to us on how it, how well it is to use, how good it is to use, and any feedback on it. And all of that will feed back into the 2-year review, so that we can improve the document and constantly improve it going forward. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd just flash this up, but it's a little bit complicated. It is our sort of standard. It's not our standard development process. It's the development process for this PAS. For those of you who've worked with us and who is familiar with our processes, you'll spot that there is an extra drafting stage in this process. So we have got that extra stage to make sure that we're engaging, as I've said. All that on the left-hand side is pretty much been done so far since January, apart from setting up those advisory groups. But that is going to be done over the summer. As you see, we'll be engaging with them before the base document, engaging with them again before the public consultation document. So that extra layer that I talked about will be brought in there. We have that extra draft prior to public consultation as well. I don't want to say more really on that. I think that's probably it from me, quite enough probably from me actually, and I'd like to pass over to Jennifer. I think if we move to the next slide, yes. So thank you so much to Jennifer for stepping up to take us through the work so far on the project. Jennifer has over 17 years of research experience and successfully managed multiple research studies specialising in construction, heritage, archaeology and the built environment, working with and for DLUC, the CITB Construction Industry Training Board, House Builders Federation, Federation of Master Builders, many other major government departments. A lot of her work has directly informed policy development at national and local levels, as well as strategic and operational planning. And she's been at the leading edge of many key research studies into modern methods of construction over the last 12 years. Some of her projects include assessing risk in volumetric construction for DLUC, skills assessment for CITB, a strategic review of assessing capability and capacity of MMC businesses, assessing impacts of long-term funding on the social housing sector, and that was with CAST consultancy and lots of other activities too. So I'll hand over to you now, Jennifer, and once again, thank you so much. And do submit some questions. We'll have some Q&A a little bit later, and I will say a bit more about schedule, next steps, and how you can get involved. Thanks so much. Over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Claire, and nice to be here. As Claire explained, Harlow Consulting are delighted to be the technical author team for this PAS development. I think, like Claire, I've been involved in more at the research end than at the coalface of offsite construction of MMC for a long time, well over 15 years, I would think. So it's really interesting to see the recent developments in this sector, to see how things are moving forward and how the agenda is really gaining momentum, underpinned obviously by policy developments as well. So I'm going to take you through the work that's been done so far. We are still at relatively early stages, I think, in terms of the process that Claire shared just now. There's quite a long way to move forward, but I'm going to explain how we started in January of this year and where we're up to at the moment. So I'm going to explain the initial scope and outline for the PAS to begin with. So this is where we began in January of this year. If we could move on, please, to the next slide. Thank you. So our starting point was very much informed by the expertise, I suppose, around the table, DLUC's input into this, the conclusions of various research studies, the work that BSI had been doing for some time that gave us a starting point. We always intended that this would be a foundation that would need to be subject to consultation, to refinement, but this is where we started. So the draft title for the PAS was going to be Modern Methods of Construction for New Build Residential Properties, and the categories of MMC. It wasn't going to cover all 7, but to cover categories 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6. The intention was this would include guidance for the entire life cycle, right the way through to repair, taking the building apart, dismantling, etc. And it would be intended for use by a number of different audiences. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the requirements of this, we were looking at build types, materials, different MMC categories, the performance, structure and finish, low carbon technologies and net zero, building on what Claire said, we wanted to think about any future retrofit. So low carbon technologies, net zero seemed like a given. The MMC fundamentals guidance was intended to span the life cycle, materials and production, risk management and safety, business operation and compliance, skills and training, information management, guidance manuals, environmental management, how it would interact with other regulations, and guidance on the technical specification. So quite wide-ranging, quite diverse, I think in line with the feedback that we'd already gathered as different organisations around the table, that this needed to be quite wide-ranging. And also in the annex, making reference to all the existing relevant standards and processes. So just building on Claire's point there, this is intended to sit within that existing landscape, not to necessarily replace or supersede anything. So this was really a way of organising the information that we had, and this was for a basis for discussion to go out to our first set of stakeholder workshops. Next slide, please. So we then, and moving on, thank you. Thank you. We then went out to a number of sector-based workshops, and the intention of these was to really consult against that draft scope and outline and understand where we needed to be, how, or were there any gaps, what did this look like, how was industry really going to react to this. So the workshops were attended by 39 individuals, and they spanned a diverse set of organisations, which is what we were aiming for, really, to get that widespread consultation. So we had representation from academics, consultants, government departments, industry bodies, professional bodies, sector bodies themselves. So I won't go through the full list, but we were really pleased that lots of people came to support this and came to give their feedback. So the first day of the workshops, we shared what the intended outcome of the PAS was going to look like. DLUC came along and also explained how they are moving this forward. And this was to talk about the broad scope and parameters of the PAS and technologies that we were going to be using. And we really wanted to use this first stage as an opportunity to surface any immediate challenges and barriers that anybody would anticipate. The second day of the workshops was to go into more detail, so the fundamentals and the requirements that I just talked you through. So talking about that breadth of content, how did industry react to that? Is that something that looked appropriate? Were there any gaps? Were there any things that didn't need to be there that were? And we were talking also about the potential structure of the PAS document itself. What kind of headings would be there? Could headings be combined? Could headings be nested, etc.? If we could go to the next slide, please. So the feedback of the workshop was quite interesting. It was a really useful opportunity to get that feedback from all of those attendees. And that surfaced a lot of benefits that came through. We had some really useful feedback in terms of the value that people perceived of this. So the consensus was that it would help improve understanding of the MMC market, that it would be able to improve productivity and efficiency, really important for the sector as a whole, that it would help achieve this behavioural cultural shift, so thinking more about processes on site, how things would move forward. We also got the feedback that this would be a way of galvanizing industry, and that would be underpinned by getting the backers of insurers who can sometimes be wary of MMC if they don't know as much about it. So the outcome really, people are looking for consistency across MMC, but also across industry as a whole. Next slide, please. So the feedback we also got around the scope and content, which has helped us refine things as we move forward. So a sense that the scope is too broad. People are looking for a way of addressing hybrid systems. The emphasis that it really does need to include disassembly, maintenance and handover. It should include life safety and property protection. And when we're thinking about finalising the scope and the aims, industry are looking for requirements of all stakeholders to be considered. So that's everybody in this process, including clients, including the people providing the finance, including the warranty providers, etc. So thinking about that stakeholder landscape very much as a whole. Looking at the drafting of it when we get to that point, and just echoing the point I made earlier, so the PAS is going to enhance, dovetail with, adhere to existing regulations. It's not intending to duplicate any of those things. It's going to signpost, it's going to exist in harmony within that landscape already. The focus needs to be on process, ways of working and performance. Mustn't stifle innovation, so thinking about a way that doesn't mean it's too rigid in its requirements, and it does enable that future innovation, and in a way that is going to future-proof against changing standards and changing requirements. The PAS should communicate that no one methodology, category or approach is better than another, so they're all looking to achieve this same standard. And also it needs to strike a balance between getting a broad scope and forensic detail. Next slide, please. So the outcome of these workshops, we looked to get a different direction moving forward. So a very clearly articulated statement of the aims and the objectives of the PAS, which would then clarify what is in and out of scope. A definition of residential housing, and decisions to be made on whether or not this is an actual specification or guidance on good practice, that this is for residential in MMC and traditional construction. Is it the first in a series starting with a smaller scope? So that then led us to have further consultation with the participants of the workshops to refine the scope still further. Next slide, please. So we undertook a survey which took place between February and March 2023, and I'll go through the results of that survey. So to begin with, we asked about the type of standard. So we wanted to be clear that a PAS specification is the most appropriate type of standard to move forward. You can see there that 2/3 of our audience said yes, just under 20% said no, and the rest were not sure. And some additional feedback that we got there, so must not dictate quality management processes, as I said before, that not looking for too much rigidity. It must have this agreement by funders, mortgage lenders and insurers. People are also looking for it to apply to traditional construction and establishing where the guidance and requirement sits within the existing regulatory framework. Next slide, please. So in terms of the audience, the question that we posed was that the PAS standard is intended for use by multiple audiences. So this spans designers, manufacturers, installers, developers, logistics providers, specifiers, assurance and warranty providers, also valuers, insurers and lending providers. So a broad scope there. And you can see that over 3/4 of the participants, the respondents to the survey, do agree with that intended audience. Next slide, please. So the people who said no, we had around about 1/4 of our respondents who said no, and we asked those people, who do you think the audience should be then, if not that group? They actually came up with a number of organisations which were repeated already, but others included clients, developers, regulators, building control, fire and rescue. But by and large, we found that there was pretty much consensus in terms of that audience. Next slide, please. So we also looked at the scope. So should the PAS standard include within its scope single-use or mixed-use residential buildings? So a bit of a mixed view there. So the majority were looking for single-use residential and mixed-use, but we also had a fairly large proportion of respondents who believe it should be single-use residential, and the remainder were not sure at this stage. Next slide, please. We also asked what should be included in the definition of residential, and we gave people a number of options, as you can see there on the chart. And you can see people were able to select multiple responses if you're wondering why that doesn't add up to 100%. So you can see there that at the top we have the most support for blocks of flats, houses, homes of multiple occupancy and student halls of residence, and then the remaining options further down. Next slide, please. So this then, we were able to take the feedback from the survey and ongoing consultation within the groups that we've already set up between ourselves, BSI, communications with DLUC, to thinking about, okay, how do we look at a revised scope and outline for the PAS, building very much on the feedback so that we are being responsive to that feedback that we have received from industry. So this now looks like, you can see in the box there, we are looking at design, specification and materials, manufacture and production, transport, logistics and storage, construction and assembly, risk management, performance and safety, business operation, quality and compliance, skills and training, and information management. So some things are repeated from the initial draft scope. We are now at the point where we're trying to very much refine this so that we can start moving on to the drafting stage. Next slide, please. So the draft scope as it stands at the moment, and this is still a draft, we are yet to finalise this scope. So this PAS specifies requirements for the use of modern methods of construction in new build residential properties. It covers multiple build types and materials used in single use and mixed use residential MMC. And this PAS is intended to cover the following types of residential buildings: houses, low-rise apartments, mid-rise apartments, and high-rise apartments. This PAS is intended to specify requirements for individual elements and build types, and this is in covering the entire life cycle. So right the way from design, delivery and assembly, repair and maintenance, production, risk, safety skills, information management, and system manuals. Next slide, please. So the PAS does not cover industrial or commercial buildings, and it does not cover the following types of residential buildings. So we have out of scope there: hostels and care homes, hotels, prisons, hospitals. The overarching objective of the PAS then is to foster consistency and, of course, very importantly, quality in MMC. So the requirements are intended to support standardization of solutions across the MMC market. It's looking to facilitate the delivery of compliant products, and those are the ones that are produced by designers, manufacturers, installers, and developers. Intended for use by multiple audiences, so this would include designers, manufacturers, installers, developers, logistics providers, specifiers, assurance and warranty providers, also relevant for use to valuers, insurers, and lending providers. Next slide, please. So the draft outline of contents currently looks like this. So under design, specification and materials, we're looking at MMC units and systems, building design, the offsite design for manufacture and assembly process, materials and component selection and substitution. Under manufacture and production, we're looking at factory production, quality management requirements, resource efficiency and waste reduction, evaluation and process improvement. And moving to transport, logistics and storage. Hopefully you can see here that this follows the life cycle. This is the order we would expect things to happen in. Planning, logistics control and management, storage and environmental protection of those products when they are being stored, when they are being moved around. Under construction and assembly, we are looking at groundworks and foundations, connections and infrastructure, site installation, building services and mechanical, electrical and plumbing, finishing, and then identifying, remedying any kind of defects that arise. Next slide, please. Thinking about risk management, performance and safety, we're looking at structural performance and integrity. So that includes water, moisture, ingress, which can be a factor that needs to be addressed, resilience and repairability, air tightness and ventilation, particularly thinking about the performance of the buildings, and fire protection and safety. Also looking at risk assessments, building physics management and energy performance, testing and inspection, commissioning and real performance measurement. And then business operation, quality and compliance, we're looking at audit and compliance, project management, communication and teamwork, procurement and supply chain management, which would span both the factory side and the site. Next slide, please. And then concluding the contents, we have skills and training. So this is looking at competence requirements for key personnel and the supply chain, but also how these are maintained and recorded. So the skills, knowledge and behaviours that are required here. And then we have information management, so use of document management systems, how sign-off and handover is being managed, the use of BIM and digital technologies in these circumstances, data analytics, manuals, so looking at design, system, installation, repair and disassembly. Next slide, please. Thank you. I will hand over back to Claire at this point. Hopefully that gives you a useful summary of where we've got to so far. I will kind of just emphasize again that we're still at a relatively early point in drafting this, but we'll be very happy to answer any questions. I'll hand over to Claire at that point.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That's great. Now, can you hear me? I apparently was sounding a little bit echoey earlier, so hopefully that's an improvement now. Well, that was really interesting and a really good whistle-stop tour of all the work that's been going on so far. There's a few questions have come in. I think questions around access to the project, information about the project, I will cover off in a little while on the next steps and how you can get involved after the questions. So hopefully you'll find the best way to engage with the project for you. We've also had quite a lot of questions about how this project relates to the Building Safety Act, the new building safety regime and the new regulator and so on. Now, clearly, this has to connect with any existing regulations and must comply with the existing body of regulations as they stand. I don't know if you've would like to comment on that at all, Jennifer.
Yeah, as you say, Claire, and I think we've both made this point that we're very keen that the final PAS sits in harmony across the existing landscape of other standards, of other processes, but of course within the legislation as well. So the intention is that it will signpost to all things relevant. So that would include the Building Safety Act and all of the relevant provisions that are contained within that. It's obviously not superseding that in any way. I think it's the message that we want to get across is that the PAS will continually signpost and make reference to everything that it needs to reference. That obviously has to include the all of the safety regulations that come through, and obviously given that there's been a lot of change in this arena since Grenfell, we would expect to see a lot of secondary legislation being developed over the next few years, and that will be taken into account in the review of the PAS moving forward as well, just to make sure that those pieces of secondary legislation, as new legislation is being developed, that the PAS continually is updated and continues to make references as required.
Yes, of course. That's we don't have all those regulations so far, but yes, I think that certainly in terms of the duty holder roles, this will, as Jennifer says, connect with all of those requirements. So let's see what else is coming through on the questions. No, that's more about the high risk buildings. Now we seem to have omitted clients on the list of intended users. I'm wondering if that's an oversight. Really, I think perhaps
yes, it will be. Clients are certainly part of that intended audience. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Spot the deliberate mistake. And also, yes, a question around section 5 and structural safety. Apparently, we're not mentioning structural safety under section 5 at the moment. Is that perhaps to be looked at?
So there's still a lot to do in terms of exploring and unpacking those headings. As I said, this is still a draft set of contents, still subject to further consultation, and structural safety has certainly been something that's been discussed. It's not something that's going to be omitted, but as yet may not have its own kind of subheading, as it were. So if that future consultation deems that it does need to have a standalone section rather than be included in other parts, then obviously that's the feedback we'll take on board, but to reassure that it's very much part of the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think it's worth reiterating. But basically where we are is we had that, as Jennifer pointed out, that initial outline of the document, which we consulted on through the workshops and then through the subsequent questionnaire as well. And what we have now is the new scope and an outline contents list. And really the next step is to go away and draft something, which will then be reviewed by those advisory panels, which I mentioned, as well as those the steering group that will be set up. Still isn't set up, nor are those panels. That is the next job, to actually review that and comment and develop it in the usual way. So just more on the Safety Act, fire safety issues. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to answer this one, and maybe it's more detailed. I think we're perhaps getting into too much, a little bit of detail insofar as we've said, this is an outline contents list rather than actually having the answers to all the questions. But there's a few questions around fire. Is there any, I mean, are there any thoughts on that aspect? Because obviously that is a you know, a topic that's close to a lot of people. Jennifer, is
absolutely, yeah, and we are hoping that there will be experts from the fire safety, fire protection stakeholder community who will be, you know, critical in terms of joining some of those advisory working groups, the panels that are going to review the standards. So we want to involve those people right from day one, and we were pleased obviously that some of those people were able to come to the initial workshops. So that's something that's obviously does have to be at the forefront of discussions when we are moving forward with refining this. Obviously, we know a lot from our research and the research that BSI have done and that DLUC have done around what the risks could look like here, and what needs to be done, how this needs to be a holistic process in addressing some of these things. It's not just it's not one size fits all in terms of a solution. It's thinking about the design, it's thinking about the building use, it's thinking about making sure with, you know, thinking about product substitutions that could affect fire safety assessments and things like that. So there's a lot to discuss on that particular agenda. I think it will be subject to some very, very detailed conversations with the advisory groups, and that we will need to go into a lot of detail at the consultation stage to make sure that that is comprehensive, that it's precise, that it's clear. So I think everybody in the room, I'm sure, is very, very keen to make sure that that happens and that is very rigorously addressed.
Yes, thank you. And I think that's absolutely right. And there's some comments around perhaps the approved documents not necessarily operating or having responded so far to some of these offsite MMC solutions, and that maybe there's elements there. And I think it's worth saying that actually we'll be going through a process for this document. Things like that may actually have a knock-on effect with other already existing standards. So some of our fire standards themselves may need to change. And the beauty of having now a standing technical committee that looks more broadly at offsite construction and MMC means that they can liaise within the formal standards structure across to some of these other committees and see where standards may need to either be modified or need to change or be revised, or where new standards gaps might emerge that we need to address. So why was student accommodation omitted when it was ranked so highly in the survey? Is that?
I believe that might be an omission on the slides rather than it being omitted per se, but I will check that. We still, as I say, we're still at the point where these things are being finalised.
Yes, yeah.
So I think student accommodation may actually should have been listed on the slide, but we'll
I
check
thought
that.
so too, because obviously there's a lot of halls of residents out there that are using this technology.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Can I just quickly build on what you were saying a moment ago,
Please,
Claire,
yes,
in terms of the what's happening, I suppose, and I just wanted to make the point that this work isn't happening in isolation. There's a lot of activity that's happening in this space, not just in MMC, but in traditional construction as well, thinking about the building safety arena more widely, the legislation that's being developed, but also there's been an extensive review of the approved documents. So approved document B is subject to its own review that's being led by Deluxe. So there's a lot happening at the same time. So it's really important for us to be cognizant of that and making sure that we are in consultation with the right people in terms of that other work and different types of research that's happening at the moment. So that's, I suppose, very much on all of our minds as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, yes. Nothing happens in isolation, as you say. Now, there's a question which I did touch on briefly about this concern that modern methods of MMC providers will be held to a higher standard than traditional build. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this is something which wouldn't necessarily be happening. But I wondered if you had any thoughts on that particular concern as to how we might address it in the standard.
Yeah, we've had that feedback before. I think not just on the PAS work, but different types of research that we've worked on. And I think it's an interesting question because it's not necessarily that there's no intention, I don't think, here from anyone in the room to try and hold people to a higher standard. And I will always say that traditional construction comes with its own issues. No, I don't think anyone is sitting here saying that MMC has problems and needs more help and traditional construction is perfect, because that's not the case. And we would like to see, we would like to understand how the standard needs to be high and the standard needs to be a high quality across the whole of the construction sector. So that's not the intention. I understand why it might come across that way if there's more work being done in offsite, but I think that stems from what you said at the beginning of the conversation, Claire, around there really aren't many standards that directly affect or directly apply to offsite construction. So it's not that we're trying to hold people to a higher account. We're almost trying to catch up and make sure that MMC is on the same playing field, that it's a level playing field with traditional construction. And that's so important for clients, for developers who need to have the reassurance that their products are going to get mortgaged, that the insurance community is on board, that the finance is there. So it's making sure that it's consistent more than anything. That would be my response to that.
Yes, thank you. All right, so I'm getting an awful lot of questions about next steps and how to get involved, and I think perhaps at that point we shall move on to that slide. So thank you very much, Jennifer, for stepping up. That was really good, and for answering the questions so well. So okay, so this is our next steps slide. It's slightly vague in terms of the timings because, of course, the project is, the schedule will be refined and more detail will be included as we develop. But this summer, obviously, we need to set up the steering group itself, get the right people around the table, get that balanced stakeholder group, as well as setting up the advisory panels, the 4 advisory panels that are going to be set up as well, and the review panel, of course, for those who want to be kept informed, so that they can comment, the public comment stage, and so that they can be download the standard when it's published. So that's the main piece of work that we're going to be doing this summer, setting up those groups and finalising those groups in consultation with DLUC. And then consulting on the scope development with those groups, certainly with the advisory panels. And you can contact me. I'll put you in touch with the editorial program manager, and he will allocate whichever area is the most appropriate. But clearly, any kind of oversubscription, we'll need to just manage that in the usual way, as you'd expect. So that's for the summer, and then as we move through to autumn and winter, the draft one, the content will be developed by Claire at Harlow Consulting, and the steering group will be invited to review that and to comment on that in detail. And then discuss that around the table. So having that detailed discussion, that detailed preliminary discussion on draft one with the steering group before developing that second draft, which goes to a discussion with the advisory group and with the steering group to think about the advisory group feedback, and then Claire will develop that third draft. We'll move towards the public consultation phase after that, and all of those comments that come in, we'll see how many. Some of these projects, especially where there's so much interest like this one, will have a lot of comments. The steering group goes through all of those, and we move on to draft 4 and publication. And for those who missed it, it's September. At the moment, we're looking at September 2024 for publication, and then adoption, implementation, and rollout following that. It is free to download, so we will expect a high level of take-up, not just because of it being free, but because of the high level of interest in the document. And then feedback will be welcome. We will be looking at all of the experience of use over that 2-year period to 2026, when the review will take place. So that's the plan to publication. And I think I have some final words on the things coming up. So thank you all so much for attending. We do have some dedicated fire webinars, as well as some broader built environment ones. The 27th of June, there's 2 things happening on the same day there. And then on the 6th of July, the Digital World Built Environment. So, but do go to knowledge.bsigroup.com to find out all of the webinars, not just Built Environment, but the wider webinars that the BSI run, and the other events that the BSI run as well. So I'd like to thank you once again for attending, and a big thank you to Jennifer for stepping up and presenting all of those initial findings and all of that early activity. And thank you to all of those who were involved in the workshops and the questionnaire. Yes, please do get in touch if you want to be involved further through this important project. I think I'm a couple of minutes early, but not to worry. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.